The clock above the register blinked toward closing time, its red numbers glowing like a warning, when everything that could go wrong decided to happen at once. The store was tired, the lights felt dimmer than usual, and the air carried that heavy end-of-day silence that only late shifts understand. That was the exact moment when anger walked through the automatic doors, loud, reckless, and looking for someone weaker to land on. What followed was not just an incident before closing, but a moment that would quietly change several lives forever. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of ordinary people doing the right thing, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Emily Carter had been standing behind the register for 9 hours straight, her feet aching inside worn sneakers, her shoulders tight from repeating the same motions all day. She was 23, working this job while trying to finish community college, carrying more responsibility than most people noticed. The store manager had already left, trusting her to lock up like always. The shelves were half empty, the floor freshly mopped, and the familiar sense of relief that came with almost being done was finally settling in. She was counting down minutes, not knowing she was also counting down to something that would test her in ways she never imagined. The man came in fast, his presence sharp and disruptive, pushing against the calm of the nearly empty store. His clothes were messy, his movements impatient, and his frustration seemed older than the moment itself, like it had been waiting all day to explode. Emily tried to stay professional, reminding herself that customers brought their own battles with them. She scanned his items carefully, apologizing when a price didn't match the shelf label, following the rules she had been taught. But patience was not what he was there for. His irritation grew heavier, filling the space between the counter and the door, making the room feel smaller. At the far end of the store, near the refrigerated section, Daniel Walker stood quietly with a basket in his hand. He was tall but carried himself with the exhaustion of someone who had learned to shrink his presence. At 34, Daniel was a single father doing his best to hold life together after it had fallen apart. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise their 6-year-old son, Noah, alone. Every decision he made revolved around that little boy. He worked long hours as a warehouse supervisor, cooked dinner every night no matter how tired he was, and still felt like he was failing most days. Tonight, he had rushed in just before closing to grab milk and cereal, knowing Noah would be waiting up past bedtime, asking if Dad remembered. Daniel noticed the tension before it erupted. He had learned to read rooms after years of conflict avoidance, after learning how fragile peace could be. The man's body language was aggressive, his energy sharp, and Emily's nervous movements told a story of someone trying desperately to keep control. Daniel hesitated, telling himself it wasn't his business, that stepping in could make things worse. He had a son to get home to. He had responsibilities. But responsibility, he had learned, didn't end at your own front door. The moment shattered when the man slammed his hand on the counter, his anger boiling over, his movements sudden and violent. Emily flinched, her breath catching, fear flashing across her face before she could hide it. The store, empty seconds before, now felt like a stage where something terrible was about to unfold. Daniel's heart started racing, not with bravery, but with fear. Fear of getting hurt. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of not coming home to his son. And yet, something deeper pushed him forward. Daniel stepped closer, placing himself within sight, within presence, not with aggression but with calm firmness. He didn't shout or threaten. He didn't posture or provoke. He simply stood there, steady, grounding the chaos by refusing to add to it. His voice, low and controlled, cut through the noise not as a challenge, but as a reminder that this moment mattered. That Emily was not alone. That someone was watching. The man's anger met resistance it hadn't expected. Not force, not violence, but quiet strength. The tension stretched long seconds that felt like minutes. The man's chest heaved, his eyes darted, and for a moment it seemed like things might spiral further. But anger often feeds on reaction, and Daniel refused to give it fuel. Eventually, the man backed away, muttering insults, storming out into the night with the automatic doors closing behind him like a final breath released. The silence afterward was overwhelming. Emily's hands were shaking as she finished the transaction Daniel barely remembered making. Her knees felt weak, and the weight of what almost happened pressed down on her chest. Daniel noticed her trying to steady herself, pretending she was fine, the way people do when they don't feel safe enough to fall apart. He stayed until she locked the doors, making sure she wasn't alone in the empty store. Outside, under the dull glow of the parking lot lights, Emily finally let herself breathe. She thanked Daniel, her voice unsteady, her gratitude raw and unpolished. He brushed it off, embarrassed, saying he just did what anyone should do, though deep down he knew how many people would have stayed silent. As he drove home, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a quiet ache in his chest. He thought of Noah, of the example he wanted to set, even when his son wasn't watching. That night, Emily went home shaken but changed. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She told her mother what happened, replaying the fear and the relief, realizing how close she had been to something far worse. She slept with the lights on, but she slept knowing someone had cared enough to step in. Daniel arrived home to a sleepy Noah curled up on the couch, cereal untouched on the table. He carried his son to bed, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the weight of the world soften just a little. He didn't tell Noah what happened, but he held him longer than usual, understanding that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about choosing others even when you were afraid. Days passed, then weeks. Life moved on the way it always does, quietly, relentlessly. But moments like that leave marks. Emily became more confident, more aware of her worth. She eventually moved on to a better job, one where she felt safer and respected. Daniel kept showing up for his son, still tired, still unsure, but a little more certain that he was doing something right. Years later, Emily would tell this story not as a tale of fear, but as one of unexpected kindness. Daniel would never know how much that night meant to her, how it restored a piece of faith she didn't realize she was losing. And Daniel would carry that night with him too, as proof that even small acts could echo louder than we imagine. Before this story ends, tell us in the comments if you've ever witnessed or experienced a moment where someone stood up for another person when it mattered most. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that courage still exists in ordinary people, please like, comment, and share this video. Your engagement helps spread these stories of humanity, and sometimes, that's exactly what the world needs to hear.